Welcome to Argus Crude Report, a podcast where we look at recent developments that affect crude markets in Europe and beyond. My name is Lina Bulyk. I am a deputy editor of Argus Crude Report here in London, and joining me today is Ellanee Kruck, our Mediterranean reporter. Hello, Ellanee.
Hi, Lina.
Today we'll be talking about Mideast Gulf supply to Europe in September. The first half of each month, European refiners that are term buyers of Mideast Gulf crude are nominating their desired volumes to the producers. And the rest of the market is usually watching this process very closely because Saudi Arabia and Iraq, between the two of them, have been the largest suppliers of medium sour crude to the region. And so the amount that they supply and the price which buyers have to pay for that crude are among the factors that have a profound impact on the direction of medium sour market in the region in the following months. So, Ellanee, could you tell us a bit about how did Saudi Aramco set their September official prices and how that relates to the market expectations?
Yes, so Aramco cut their official prices in September for Northwest Europe and the Mediterranean by $3 on the month across all grades. This was a much more significant cut than most refiners had been expecting. Some had even expected a hike of up to $10 on the month. And this was largely because Saudi crude remains one of the key medium sour flows into Europe. Iraqi crude through the Basra oil terminal is still cut off by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which has left the region mostly reliant on more local grades and those from Latin America and West Africa. So a $3 cut puts Arab Light, which is Saudi's flagship crude, at its lowest level since 2021 and puts it at about a $4 to $5 discount to Norwegian Johan Sverdrup, which is the largest local medium sour grade in Europe, and Libyan Asida, which is often used as an alternative for medium sour crude, all on a delivered basis, which is a pretty significant cut for September prices.
It is indeed, and those cuts are like that exceed expectations of the market is a quite unusual thing, right? Because typically before Saudi Aramco issues their OSPs, we hear that market expects smaller increases or indeed larger cuts than where Aramco ends up setting their prices at. So what do we know about why Aramco set their prices so favorable for a buyer?
So there are a few theories that have been going around among market participants on this. One of them is that over the summer, Saudi's pricing has been pretty aggressive, and as a result, a lot of European refiners have decided to opt out or limit their intake of Saudi term crude. And they've effectively shown that Europe is not willing to take or will not take Saudi crude at any price, even if they're really desperate for it, even if other supplies have been cut off. They would much rather go to the spot market and try and find a better deal. And so Aramco could be trying to ensure basically that they still get some of their market share in Europe and still have a level of demand in the region, especially as their exports to Asia look set to be pretty disrupted for the rest of August and into September because of there's Yemeni Houthis threats to shipping, particularly around the Bab el-Mandeb. There's also the theory that because there is expectations from some refiners that the Strait of Hormuz could be set to open in the coming weeks and months, and therefore Aramco is trying to position their crude at a competitive rate now, but also for when that key waterway reopens and flows of Iraqi crude, for example, restart, it will still leave Saudi crude looking competitive.
I see. I guess both of those theories kind of make sense, right? And the thing that you mentioned about Houthi threat to shipments through Bab el-Mandeb, how does Aramco actually plan to export this crude? Do we know anything about their strategies? Because if Hormuz remains closed in September and if Houthis keep targeting ships is Saudi crude that goes through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. What are Saudi's options?
So Saudi has had to be pretty flexible with their strategies over the last few months because of the closure of Hormuz, which meant that they put a lot more crude, or practically all of their crude, through the East-West pipeline, which has a capacity of about 7 million barrels a day, and have started shipping all exports from Yanbu, which is their port on the Red Sea coast. Crude was already going to Europe via this route. It then can go up either through the Suez Canal, or more commonly will go up into Egypt through the Suez pipeline and out from Egypt City Courier port for onward export into Europe. But since the closure of Hormuz, Asia has also been receiving a lot of their Saudi crude from Yanbu, and then it's being taken around the Bab al-Mandeb and into Asia. But as a result of the latest threats by the Houthis, it looks like Saudi is going to have to move the majority of their crude, or refiners will have to pick up the majority of their crude and take it effectively up through the Suez Canal or into Egypt. However, capacity for this is pretty limited. We've seen that kind of maximum exports from Egypt City Courier is about 1.8 million barrels a day, and Saudi exports tend to average around 7 million barrels a day, so there's obviously a big difference there. What we have seen is that Aramco have started offering September loading supplies from Yanbu on a FOB basis, which could mean that some refiners begin taking it from there, which takes off some of the pressure from moving everything through Egypt. From there, refiners can either try and brave the Bab el-Mandeb route, or more likely will take it up through the Suez Canal.
And we did hear that Aramco was offering some of its crude on a spot basis to European refiners, which is quite an unusual thing for them to do, right? So,
sorry. Yes, that is typically Aramco offers all of their crude, or sells all of their crude on a term basis through term contracts. But we did hear that there was some August loading spot supplies offered, loading from Egypt City Courier, which was taken by some European refiners as well as some Asian refiners.
So altogether, the Saudi side of supply adds up to quite a favorable situation for a European refiner to be in, right? How about Iraqi? So Somo typically follows while setting the OSPs, they typically would follow Aramco in terms of direction. So if Aramco cuts the OSPs, they would typically also cut the OSPs. And someone might argue that right now Iraqi OSPs are much less relevant than Aramco's OSPs because Basra supply is still trapped within Hormuz and flows are not anywhere close to pre-war levels. But should the flows resume next month, that crude will be getting out and the OSPs will be setting the mood. So how did Aramco set the prices for September?
So Somo went in a different direction. They actually increased their official prices on the month. They increased Basra Medium by $2.50 and Basra Heavy by $2.25. This is obviously pretty different to what Aramco has done, but it's worth noting that Basra crude is still looking around $6 cheaper than Saudi crude, or Saudi Arab Light, which is their flagship grade.
How is that possible that they increased their OSPs and their crude is still cheaper?
So it's worth noting that Saudi prices their crude to Europe against ICE Brent, whereas Somo uses North Sea dated. And so there's obviously going to be discrepancies in where those two benchmarks are. Dated was at a discount to ICE Brent for most of July, but it has now switched to a premium. This premium, however, is much smaller than the one we saw in May and June. And as Somo is using this basis, as the basis price that Somo is using is a much smaller premium to the basis month that Aramco is using, they could probably afford to increase their differential more significantly than Aramco could.
That makes perfect sense. And what those relatively cheap term barrels from Aramco and potentially Somo, if Somo manages to get that out of the strait, what does that mean for Europe? Because term supplies are typically more expensive than spot supply, right? So where does it leave a European buyer?
I mean, things in terms of medium sour supply in Europe are looking up, particularly in comparison to previous months where things have been squeezed by the closure of Hormuz. Especially if we consider there is the possibility that Aramco could again in September offer spot supplies from City Korea as they did in August. This could mean that even with Hormuz remaining closed, that Europe has quite a significant amount of term crude coming its way and Saudi crude in general coming its way, which will leave it less reliant on the spot market and local alternatives.
And what is a bit surprising in this situation is that we haven't seen spot prices reacting very strongly to this expectation of higher supply from Mideast Gulf. So Johan Sverdrup, which is, as you mentioned, the biggest stream of medium sour crude produced in Europe, it is currently a bit cheaper than it was in late July when the entire European market was panicking because of CPC loading disruptions. But Sverdrup is still quite strong by historical standards. And on the other hand, activity on September barrels of the grade has been quite muted. We have not heard of any offers being made in the last few days, which probably hints us that the market is still waiting to see on the final decisions from Aramco on the final moves of the players in that part of the market. And that spot prices in Europe might still change in the coming sessions. We'll be following all those developments very closely in our Argus Crude Report and in our analytical publications like Argus Global Markets, and obviously in our daily news and analysis on our website at Argus Direct. If you have any questions or any comments, we are always very excited to hear back from you. And that's all from us for today. Thank you very much, Ellanee.
Thank you, Lina.